How to make homemade wine with any fruit, flower, or vegetable. Making fruit wine is surprisingly simple, and while the winemaking recipes may change slightly depending on the type of fruit you choose, the general process is pretty much always the same. These simple fruit wines are known as country wines and have been made in the countryside for generations. No fancy winery required. Making country wine is as simple as following a recipe, and if you can do that, then you're already almost there. Grape wine is complicated, but believe it or not, fruit wine is not. Grape wine relies on the grapes being absolutely perfect, balanced, and complete to make it work, and it's more an agricultural phenomenon than fermentation alchemy. Fruit wines don't have that pretense, and they allow you a lot more flexibility as the winemaker to craft beautiful homemade wines, even if you're not growing the fruit. Other fruits, besides grapes, don't have the right balance of sugar, acid, tannin, and nutrients all on their own, so there's no expectation that the fruit would do all the work. Instead, the winemaker adds things to balance the wine and ensure successful fermentation. In the end, the fruit adds amazing flavor and color, but the recipe determines the success of the wine, rather than how the fruit was grown. That's not to say you shouldn't use the absolute best quality fruit possible. It just means the process is much more forgiving and repeatable at home, since you're adding ingredients besides just juice. Steps in winemaking. I'll cover all of this in more detail shortly, but as a starting point, these are the basic steps in winemaking. Prepare the fruit, sterilize the juice, optional. Add yeast, primary fermentation, 7 to 14 days. Racking, move to a clean container, secondary fermentation, for weeks to 6 months, tasting and adjusting, tertiary fermentation, optional, bottling, bottle conditioning, 2 weeks to several years. Equipment for winemaking. If you're an experienced winemaker, you already have all this equipment on hand. If this is your first batch of homemade wine, you'll need the following equipment. 1-gallon glass carboy, X2, a narrow neck fermentation vessel, also called a carboy, will hold the fruit wine while it ferments. You'll need 2 since the wine needs to be moved to a clean container, leaving the sediment behind, after 7 to 10 days of active primary fermentation. They often come in a kit with a rubber stopper and water lock together. Rubber stopper and water lock, basically a one-way valve that allows CO2 to escape, but prevents contaminants from entering the fermentation vessel. A water lock is essential because, without it, the brew is at a high risk of turning into vinegar during secondary. Not the end of the world, because then you have wine vinegar, but disappointing when you were hoping for wine. Brewing siphon, used to move the fruit wine from one container to another, and for bottling. Using a siphon allows you to move the ferment without disturbing the sediment on the bottom by simply pouring it from one container to another. Pouring carefully, you can technically get away without one, but it's a lot easier to use a siphon, and it'll result in a finished fruit wine with more clarity. Wine bottles, the best option for bottling. Wine bottles will allow the wine to be stored for longer periods. Corks naturally breathe, and wine in a wine bottle will improve over time with bottle aging. Beer bottles are also an option, but better for short-term storage. Flip-top Grolsch bottles work as well, and they're really convenient because they're reusable and come with the cap attached for quick bottling without additional equipment. Wine bottles can be reused, provided you wash them and clean them with brewing sanitizer between uses. Bottle corker. If you're using wine bottles, you'll need a corker as well. Be sure to use clean, new corks for bottling the wine. If using Grolsch bottles, corks and a corker are unnecessary. Brewing sanitizer. A one-step no-rinse brewing sanitizer cleans and sanitizes all equipment before use, preventing contamination and resulting in a more predictable winemaking experience. Without it, there's a greater chance of infection by acetic acid bacteria that will turn the wine into vinegar. If you'd like to find substitutions so you don't have to buy equipment, there are likely things already on hand at your home that can work in a pinch. I'd suggest reading my guide to winemaking equipment to understand what each piece is for and what you can use instead. Ingredients for winemaking. The quantity of each ingredient will vary based on the type of fruit and your recipe, but just about every recipe has the same basic ingredients. That's because all country winemaking recipes are trying to create a balanced fruit wine with enough residual sweetness to be tasty, enough acidity to add a bright flavor, and enough tannin to give a good body and mouthfeel. The fruit brings some of these things, and the actual amount of each ingredient depends on the type of fruit. Pineapples in pineapple wine and lemons in lemon wine are obviously a lot more acidic than other fruits, so the acid added in the recipe will be adjusted accordingly. Some fruits, like blackcurrants, already have natural tannins, so you don't have to add any. It's all about balancing what's already in the fruits to create a high-quality fruit wine. Here are the basic ingredients for country wine. Fruit, or fruit juice, the base of your winemaking recipe. Sugar, most fruit, besides wine grapes, isn't sweet enough to make wine on its own without added sugar. Yeast nutrient feeds the yeast to help encourage fermentation, as many fruits don't have perfectly balanced nutrients. Acid blend yeast need an acidic environment to ferment, but this also improves flavor as well. Pectic enzyme breaks down pectin to help clarify the wine. Optional, tannin powder adds natural tannins to improve flavor and mouthfeel. Optional, but recommended, wine yeast makes the alcohol and imparts quite a bit of flavor to the finished wine. Camden tablets, used to sterilize juice before fermentation. I don't use these. Optional. If you'd like to understand what each ingredient is for and how you can substitute common household things for the harder-to-find ingredients, I'd suggest reading my guide to winemaking ingredients. How to make fruit wine. I covered the basic steps at the very beginning, but now I'll explain each step. Be sure to carefully read your winemaking recipe, as the instructions can vary depending on your recipe. Prepare the fruit. This can mean a variety of things depending on the type of fruit. Some are mashed, others frozen to break up their cells, and still, others peeled and pureed. Some are just washed, added whole, without much fuss. Either way, the goal is to get their juice and flavors to come out into the wine, without extracting too much in the way of pectin, and usually without cooking them at all, as that drives off some of their volatile flavor compounds. Sterilize the juice, optional. These days, most people opt to chemically sterilize the fruit with Camden tablets. This kills off any yeast on the fruit and means you're only fermenting with added yeast from a packet. It's a more dependable method, since packaged yeast is more dependable and consistent than wild yeast. That said, packaged yeast is also a lot more vigorous and tolerant of high alcohol levels than wild yeast. We don't sterilize our juice because the cultivated yeast quickly outcompetes the wild yeast on the fruit in a matter of days, and then any that are left die out completely as alcohol levels rise. If you do sterilize the juice, you'll have to wait 24 hours for the sulfites to evaporate before adding yeast, so that you don't kill your own yeast too. Add yeast. Yeast is added right before fermentation, and it's rehydrated in a bit of plain water first. Dried yeast can shock if it goes directly into your sugary wine mixture. Be sure that the wine mixture is at room temperature before adding the yeast, and that you've waited the appropriate amount of time after adding Camden tablets, if using. The mixture should start vigorously bubbling within 24 to 72 hours. Primary fermentation. For the first 7 to 14 days, the wine is in what's known as primary fermentation. The yeast are working fast and rapidly multiplying. It's often vigorous and creates a lot of sediment at the bottom of the fermenter. There's little alcohol at this point, so primary fermentation is often done in an open bucket that's just covered with a towel. An airlock isn't strictly required at this point. Racking. After the initial vigorous fermentation is complete in primary, the wine is racked into a clean container. This is done with a siphon to avoid stirring up the sediment or lees at the bottom of the primary fermenter. If wine is left on the lees, it can develop off flavors. Secondary fermentation. Once the wine is racked into secondary, it's sealed with an airlock. That's a one-way valve that prevents oxygen from getting in, but allows the CO2 produced during fermentation to escape. This prevents the alcohol that's produced from turning into vinegar. Secondary usually lasts about a month, but can last much longer depending on the recipe. The wine should be kept at a cool room temperature and in a dark place without direct sunlight. Ideally, a basement or back closet that's about 65 to 68 F, 18 to 20 C. Tasting and adjusting. After secondary, it's time to taste the wine and adjust as needed. At this point, it'll taste very rough as it hasn't bottle aged at all, but it should give you a rough idea of the final flavors to expect. If it's very dry, this is where you'd add some sugar or honey, or if it's too sweet, you can consider adding some acidity to balance, or pitching in a more vigorous yeast strain to eat up more of the sugars. You can add more tannin or really anything that might be needed. Or, if it's good, just go right to bottling. Tertiary fermentation optional. If you have made adjustments, you'll need to rack the wine into another fermenter for another couple of weeks to allow things to settle out before bottling. Bottling. To bottle, use a brewing siphon to move the wine into wine bottles and seal them with corks. Some people opt to sterilize their wines with potassium sorbate at bottling, which prevents additional fermentation in the bottle. I do not sterilize. I just make sure the secondary is long enough that the yeast has died off, and I'll rack into tertiary if necessary to get any last activity out of the yeast. Bottle conditioning. Once in the bottle, the wine will need to bottle condition for a minimum of 2 weeks before drinking, ideally much longer, more like 2 months, or upwards of a year for some varieties. After that, it's time to enjoy your wine. Red wine is an alcoholic drink with a deep red color that comes from dark-colored grapes. To produce red wine, winemakers ferment crushed grapes, including the grape skin. Yeast grows and takes in the natural sugars, converting them into alcohol. The grape skin gives red wine some of its color and flavor. Tannins, which are a group of naturally occurring chemicals found in plant cells present in wine, form during fermentation and are responsible for the wine's bitter but pleasant taste. There is some evidence that drinking red wine may offer health benefits. If you are a non-drinker, health experts do not recommend that you start drinking alcohol. But if you enjoy alcohol in moderation, red wine is worth considering. Red wine may be healthier than white wine because of the different fermentation processes. Unlike red wine, most white wine is fermented after the grape skins are separated from the mashed fruit and juice. As many of the antioxidants in grapes are in the skin, red wine contains more antioxidants than white wine. Antioxidants are important for maintaining good health because they protect your cells from damage. The antioxidants found in wine are polyphenol, which are compounds found in plants. One polyphenol in red wine that is of interest to scientists is resveratrol, which may have benefits including protection for your brain, heart, and body. Some benefits of drinking red wine can be traced to the alcohol itself, so any alcoholic drink used in moderation could have the same effect. Other research into the health benefits of red wine focuses on the particular qualities of red wine, many of which have not been fully explored. The antioxidants in red wine could lower blood pressure. In a few studies of people with slightly elevated blood pressure, red wine extract lowered readings. Both systolic and diastolic pressure improved. The studies concluded that the polyphenol in red wine were responsible. Although more research is needed, some studies show that red wine is good for heart health because it helps reduce the risk of plaque buildup in the arteries. Resveratrol, a polyphenol in red wine, has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties and may reduce the risk of cancer by discouraging cancer cell growth. Although more human studies are needed to confirm this effect, early research on resveratrol in wine has shown its cardiovascular benefits. It's possible, however, that compounds other than resveratrol in red wine are responsible for a lower risk of certain cancers, including colon and prostate cancer. The polyphenol, which occur naturally in red wine, prevent the formation of certain proteins that create toxic plaques that can kill brain cells. These polyphenol can also lessen the plaque toxicity that is already present in the body, thus reducing cognitive decline. Research shows that drinking in moderation could reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia versus no alcohol intake. Some effects of alcohol on the brain, including reduced blood thickness and increases in HDL or healthy cholesterol, seem to show that moderate alcohol consumption may help lower the risk of developing dementia. However, we need more research on this. A large study of current drinkers showed that a moderate intake of alcohol, especially wine, with meals could reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. The results were not the same for heavy drinking or drinking alcohol without a meal. The association between moderate alcohol consumption and reduced risk of new-onset type 2 diabetes is inconclusive. Talk to your doctor about the benefits and risks of moderate drinking. While some studies have shown the health benefits of drinking red wine, you should weigh the benefits against the risks and keep in mind the dangers of alcohol abuse. Drinking red wine presents some potential health risks. About 10% of the population is at risk of an allergic reaction to wine. Many components of wine can trigger a reaction, including yeast, molds, and sulfites. Even the flavonoids, which make red wine healthy, can cause an intolerance reaction. Red wine is one of the forms of alcohol most likely to cause a reaction in people with asthma. Many people struggle with excessive alcohol consumption. The CDC states that an average of 1 in 6 American adults binge drink. Binge drinking is defined as consuming 4 or more drinks on an occasion for women and 5 or more for men. Many drinkers, especially those who drink heavily, which is defined as 8 or more alcoholic drinks in a week in women and 15 or more in men, underreport their alcohol consumption. Hence, the problem may be worse than reports indicate. Those who are pregnant should not drink alcohol. This precaution extends to those planning to get pregnant and to those who are breastfeeding. All types of alcohol, including red wine, should be avoided. People who suffer from gout should not drink at all. Consumption of alcohol, including wine, can worsen gout symptoms, including increased urate levels. Higher levels of uric acid in the bloodstream are a trigger for gout. Drinking too much alcohol of any kind can damage the liver, leading to conditions such as cirrhosis. Alcohol can even worsen conditions caused by a virus, such as hepatitis C. Wine contains a lot of calories per serving. Even moderate drinking affects your daily caloric intake, which at high levels can cause weight gain. Heavy drinking is linked to some cancers, including those of mouth and throat, esophagus, voice box, liver, colon and rectum, and breast. Chemicals that form in our bodies from drinking alcohol damage our DNA. This damage can result in a cell growing uncontrollably and leading to a cancer tumor. Alcohol can cause physical and psychological dependence. Scientists believe that if you have a family history of misusing alcohol, you have a 50% chance of being prone to alcohol abuse and addiction. Long-term alcohol dependence can weaken your immune system and make your body more prone to infections. It can also affect your body's stress response, which increases your risk for many chronic diseases.